Hello and welcome to my channel. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Siren's Revenge. The Isle of Wight's coastline stretched endlessly before Holly Arnold as she stood from unconsciousness. Her head pounded, her lungs felt scorched, and her limbs, heavy with exhaustion, trembled beneath her. She coughed up briny seawater, the salt still stinging the back of her throat. For a moment, the memory of the wreck flashed before her eyes, screams, the deafening roar of waves crashing against the ship, and the sickening sensation of being dragged under. But against all odds, she had survived. The ship, the Siren, had been sailing through calm seas the night before the storm appeared, as if conjured by some malevolent force. One moment the crew had been relaxed, and the next chaos reigned. Holly remembered the cold fear that had gripped her heart, the way the dark water swallowed men whole. She was alone now, stranded on a shore she didn't recognize. Gasping for breath, Holly slowly pushed herself to her feet. The beach was unlike any she had seen before, eerily quiet and deserted, with no sign of debris from the wreck. Cliffs loomed in the distance, jagged and imposing. The sky was overcast, casting an unnatural gloom over the island. In the distance she heard it a song. Sweet, almost otherworldly, it drifted to her on the breeze. Holly's heart quickened. Was it possible someone else had survived? Maybe the crew was calling for help. She staggered toward the sound, her body aching with each step. As she neared the cliffs, the melody grew louder, more intoxicating, like nothing she had ever heard. It lured her, beckoned her, pulling her closer as if promising salvation. The sharp rocks underfoot were slick with seaweed, and more than once she slipped, but the song never faltered. It was beautiful yet unsettling, like the voice of something that wasn't entirely human. When Holly reached the base of the cliffs, she saw them. 3 figures stood perched on the rocks, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Their hair cascaded down their backs like waterfalls of midnight, and their skin gleamed with an ethereal glow, as though the very sea had imbued them with its magic. They were beautiful, but something about them felt wrong. Too perfect. Too poised. "Welcome, dear traveler," one of the figures called, her voice lilting like a summer breeze. Her eyes, the color of the deepest ocean, locked onto Holly with an unsettling intensity. "You've made it to shore. We've been waiting for you." Holly froze. Waiting for her. How could that be possible? Another of the women stepped forward, her lips curling into a smile that sent a chill down Holly's spine. "So few survived the storm. You must be special." The third figure, silent until now, began to hum again, that haunting melody rising once more. It wound its way into Holly's mind, soft and persuasive, urging her to let her guard down, to trust them. But something in Holly rebelled. She took a cautious step back. "Ah?" Her voice came out weak, betraying her fear. The woman in the center tilted her head, amusement dancing in her eyes. "We are the daughters of the sea, dear one. You are fortunate to have found us. The ocean can be so unforgiving." Another step back, the jagged rocks pressing against her heels. "What do you want?" The women exchanged glances, and Holly saw something dark pass between them. The one who had been silent earlier spoke, her voice low and hungry. "We only want what was promised to us. The ship was ours, and now, so are you." Panic surged through Holly. She turned to run, but the melody intensified, clawing its way into her thoughts, fogging her mind. Her feet stumbled, and she fell hard against the rocks, scraping her hands as she tried to scramble away. The laughter of the women echoed around her, cold and cruel. "You cannot escape, child," the first woman cooed, her voice now sharper, less sweet. "We have been watching your kind for centuries. Every ship that strays too close, every soul that touches these shores, they all belong to us." Holly struggled to her feet, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She glanced around, desperate for some way out, but the island was a prison of stone and sea, with no sign of escape. The figures began to descend from the rocks, moving with an unnatural grace, their eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. Desperation fueled Holly's movements as she backed away, her mind racing. She had heard the stories, the legends of the sirens that haunted the waters around the Isle of Wight. But those were just myths, weren't they? "You shouldn't have come here," the second woman whispered, her voice slithering through the air. But now that you have, there is no leaving. We need new blood to walk among the living, and you, Holly Arnold, will make the perfect vessel. Her name. How did they know her name? Terror was suffocating now, and Holly felt her heart hammering in her chest. The world around her spun, and the cliffs seemed to close in. She could hear the waves crashing against the shore, but even they sounded distant, drowned out by the sound that seeped into her very bones. In one last desperate attempt, Holly turned and ran toward the cliffs, her bare feet slipping on the wet stones. She could hear the women following her, their laughter cruel, their footsteps unnervingly quiet. The song, that wretched, hypnotic melody, pounded in her skull, growing louder with each passing second. She stumbled to the edge of the cliffs, looking down at the sea that had once tried to claim her. The drop was steep, the waters below dark and churning. Behind her, the sirens were closing in. Nowhere to run, little survivor, the leader of the sirens taunted, her voice barely above a whisper. We've been waiting for you for so long. Holly's pulse raced, her thoughts frantic. The sea below offered no safety, but staying meant certain death or worse. She took a deep breath, her gaze locked on the treacherous waters below. The sirens were nearly upon her now, their hands outstretched, their song wrapping around her mind like chains. With a final cry, Holly flung herself over the edge of the cliff. Cold. The water swallowed her, dragging her under like it had before. But this time she didn't fight. The current was strong, pulling her deeper, and she let it. Above her, she could still hear the siren's song, but it was fading, muffled by the weight of the ocean. Darkness surrounded her, pressing in on all sides. Holly's lungs burned, but she kept sinking, kept letting the sea take her. She would rather drown than let those creatures take her soul. But just as she felt the last of her strength fading, something moved in the water, something vast and ancient. Eyes, cold and glowing, opened in the deep, and Holly realized with horror that she had not escaped the sirens at all. She had only reached the final stage of their revenge. In her last moments, as the darkness closed in, she heard them laughing above the waves, their songs still echoing in her mind. And then nothing. Holly Arnold, the lone survivor of the wreck, had become yet another victim of the Isle of Wight's unforgiving shores, her fate sealed by the siren's revenge. Holly felt a strange heaviness in the silence that followed. Was this death? The abyss? No light, no sound, just endless cold. Yet something gnawed at her senses, an awareness lingering at the edges of her mind. Slowly, she became conscious of a presence surrounding her, wrapping her in the crushing depths of the ocean. But she wasn't dead. Her eyes fluttered open, and she found herself in a place she couldn't comprehend. It was dark, yes, but within the gloom, faint bioluminescence pulsed along the walls of what appeared to be a submerged cave. The water here was oddly still, but Holly could breathe. Her lungs expanded as if the very water around her had turned to air. She sat up, trembling, her hands touching the smooth, icy surface beneath her. She was no longer on the jagged rocks of the island. Wherever this was, it was far beneath the surface. A voice echoed through the darkness, sending a shiver through her. You thought you could escape us, did you? Holly spun around, her heart hammering in her chest. The sirens were there, all three of them, standing at the mouth of the cave. Their eyes glowed with a cold, predatory light. But they didn't look entirely human anymore. Their bodies seemed elongated, their skin shimmering with the eerie glow of the sea creatures that lurked in the deepest parts of the ocean. Their hair flowed like tendrils of ink, moving in the water as if it had a life of its own. Holly's breath caught in her throat as the leader of the sirens stepped forward, her smile widening to reveal rows of sharp, gleaming teeth. You've taken the plunge, dear Holly, but there's no escaping the sea. We've claimed you. And now you belong to us. Panic surged through Holly's veins as she backed away, but there was nowhere to run. The cave was small, and the water felt alive, pressing against her, holding her in place. Holly's voice was hoarse, almost breaking as she spoke. Why me? The sirens circled her slowly, their eyes never leaving her. The one closest to Holly, the one who had first sung to her, leaned in close, her voice a low murmur. You survived the storm, she said. Most do not. That makes you special. That means the sea has plans for you. Holly shook her head. Plans? What plans? The leader of the sirens crouched before Holly. We are bound to this place, trapped between the worlds of the living and the dead. Our only escape is through those who survive the storm, those like you. We need a mortal vessel to walk among the living, to escape the curse that holds us here, and you, Holly, are perfect." She realized now what they meant. They didn't just want to kill her, they wanted to inhabit her body, to wear her skin, and live through her. The leader reached out, her cold fingers brushing against Holly's cheek. "You will serve as our vessel. You'll carry us into the world above, and we'll walk the earth again." Terror gripped Holly, but deep down, something stirred in her. She had always been a fighter, someone who didn't give up easily, even in the face of impossible odds. She had survived the shipwreck, the storm, and even their cursed song. She wasn't about to let them take her without a fight. As the siren's cold fingers traced her skin, Holly lunged forward, grabbing the creature's wrist and twisting it with all her strength. The siren let out a shriek of surprise, her eyes flashing with fury. Holly didn't wait, she darted toward the entrance of the cave, her body moving faster than it should have in the water. But the other sirens were quick. They moved like shadows, their bodies cutting through the water with terrifying speed. One of them grabbed her ankle, yanking her back, but Holly kicked hard, her foot connecting with something soft. The siren released her with a snarl, but the others were closing in. In a desperate move, Holly reached for a sharp piece of coral on the cave wall and swung it wildly. She felt it connect with flesh, and the siren in front of her let out another worldly wail, recoiling in pain. Holly didn't stop. She slashed at the water, at the sirens who tried to grab her, her heart pounding in her chest. "Fool," the leader hissed. "You cannot fight us if you are ours." As she fought, she noticed the walls of the cave pulsating, as if the sea itself was reacting to her defiance. The water around her began to churn, growing colder and more turbulent. The bioluminescence flickered wildly, casting strange shadows across the cave walls. The leader of the sirens let out a guttural growl, her eyes blazing with fury. "Enough, you will submit." As the cave trembled around her, she realized something. This place, this underwater lair, was not natural. It was a prison, a tomb for these creatures. And maybe, just maybe, she could destroy it. With a surge of determination, Holly turned toward the far wall of the cave, where the bioluminescence pulsed the brightest. The sirens lunged after her, their voices rising in a cacophony of rage, but Holly didn't hesitate. She raised the coral shard and slammed it into the wall with all her might. The cave shuddered violently, and for a moment everything was still. Then the water erupted in a maelstrom of chaos. The walls of the cave began to crack, splitting open as if the sea itself was tearing the place apart. The sirens screamed, their bodies twisting and contorting in the violent current. Holly was thrown back, her body tumbling through the water, but she kept her eyes fixed on the cracks in the cave wall. The glowing light intensified, growing brighter and brighter until it was blinding. Holly felt the pull of the current dragging her toward the surface, away from the collapsing cave, away from the sirens. As the light swallowed her, she heard one last, furious scream echoing through the water, the leader of the sirens shrieking in defeat. And then everything went dark. Holly woke up on the shore once again, her body aching and cold. The storm had passed, and the island was quiet. She sat up slowly, her mind reeling from what had happened. The sirens were gone. The cave was destroyed. But she knew deep down that the sea never truly lets go of its prey. She had survived, but the siren's song would forever linger in the depths, waiting for the next soul to fall into their trap. The Isle of Wight had its secrets, and Holly had barely scratched the surface. But she was still alive. For now. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had or have a great day.